Hello fellow computer enthusiasts, my name is Christian, hope you're doing well today. Welcome in today's episode of ILTPWC, where I show you how to code in Python. It doesn't matter if you are already a programmer and you know other programming languages, or if you are totally new to computer programming, I will teach you everything you need in order to learn Python. And I promise we do it the fun way, so follow me into my home lab and let's start your coding journey. Why would you learn a programming language? The fact that you are here already indicates that you want to learn Python and that you want to become a programmer. But before we go into the step-by-step tutorial, let's have a quick look on all the cool things you can do with computers if you are able to code. And the reason we talk about that is to keep you motivated and hopefully increase your already existing passion and excitement for computer programming. You might want to learn programming to automate all the boring tasks you do in your home lab or while working with spreadsheets. But you can do much cooler things like teaching robots how to move and explore unknown territories. You can invite your friends to play games that you have created by your own. And last but not least, it will offer a career path with great payment and benefits. And if you are a father like me or a mother, it also enables you to teach your children early how to use a computer the fun way. And please keep in mind that learning Python is just a door opener to the wonderful world of computer programming, where everything you can imagine can become reality with just a few lines of code. And I promise I have done everything to make sure that this is not just another boring programming course. Instead, you will learn Python from scratch the fun way with real-life code examples and a cute character walking around on the screen. So, introductions aside, let's learn Python together and make you become a beginner software developer. The first step that you have to take is to install Python to your computer as well as an IDE or integrated development environment. Okay, you can also just go with an editor. To do that, let's go to python.org and download the latest version of Python. By the time creating this tutorial, it is Python 3.11.2. But if you watch this video in future where we have a much higher Python version, don't worry, everything you will learn in this tutorial will work in upcoming versions too. Python can be installed on every operation system, such as Windows, Linux and macOS. You can also start programming Python on a single board computer like the famous Raspberry Pi or other cheap alternatives. The next thing you need in order to follow the tutorial is an editor to write source code. If you already have one that supports Python syntax highlighting, you're good to go, otherwise my recommendation would be Visual Studio Code because it's free and awesome. It's my first choice as an editor for a developer or as an IDE when it comes to programming languages such as Python and C#. But it's also great for infrastructure stuff like Docker and Kubernetes and also works with embedded development for microcontrollers. To install Visual Studio Code or VSCode, just go to the website code.visualstudio.com and download the latest version of the software. It also works like a charm on all major operation systems, whether it be macOS, Linux or Windows. In my professional career as a software developer and coach to people who want to become better at coding, I learned that for many people the most engaging factor to learn is by creating something that is visually appealing and that is fun to use. Therefore, I'll teach you Python while we are writing a small computer game. In order to do so, we have to install a small game engine that is called Pygame0, and we can install it via pip, which is Python's package manager. You will see that programming and especially professional software development is not just you writing algorithms and code, it's putting together puzzle pieces that others have developed and that are provided as packages or libraries that you can use within your project. And that is what pip is made for. It helps us to integrate source files and binaries from others with all the necessary dependencies. The package that we want to use is called Pygame0, which is a game engine intended for use in education that makes creating Python-based games easy without a boilerplate. To install Pygame0, we open the terminal in Visual Studio Code and write pip install pg0. If you are doing this tutorial on a Raspberry Pi with Raspbian, pg0 is already part of your distribution. You can skip this step and don't have to install pg0 again. Now let's create a new folder for the tutorial project and call it ILTPWC or whatever name is pleasing to you. One quick remark, Python is a programming language that isn't compiled, it's interpreted, and that means you can interact with Python via the terminal, or if you want to write more complex programs, you can write source code in a file. That is what we do in this tutorial. Let's create our first source file and call it main.py, which indicates our IDE that this file contains Python code. Python is a very simple language and has a very straightforward syntax. It encourages programmers to program without a boilerplate. The simplest directive in Python is a print directive. It simply prints out a line. So let's write our first Python program. Print hello world. Press execution and you see hello world in the terminal. Congratulations, you have written your first Python program. The first thing that you need to learn is that every programming language provides variables to store data. Python is completely object-oriented and not statically typed, which means that every variable in Python is an object, and that you don't need to declare the type of the variable, nor the variable itself before using them. The first type of variables that we want to look for are numbers. Python in general differentiates between two different types of numbers. Integers, I mean whole numbers, and floating point numbers, I mean decimals. And we will later see that you can also do complex numbers, but for the sake of this tutorial, we will just work with float and integer values. To create a variable, just pick a name for the variable and assign the value you want it to store, like a is 1. With print a, we can see now that a stores the value 1, b is 2, C is A plus B. When you print C, you will see that Python is a great calculator and that all mathematical expressions are supported. We could write something like print 5 multiply with 7 plus 2 and we get a result. And can also combine as many variables as we want into our equation, like print A plus 2 multiply with C. And we see the result. If you want to work with decimal numbers, you can just write D is 7.2, E is D plus 0.8. And now we print E and get a floating point number. Let's keep numbers aside and let's talk about words and sentences, which are usually saved as strings in a programming language. So we can have, for example, a variable called name with the value Nadja and print it to our command line. So name is Nadja. Print name. And we see the variable name now stores the name Nadja. We can also use the plus sign in order to concatenate multiple strings, like print hello plus name plus how are you. And now we see the whole sentence, hello Nadja, how are you? Just as a hint, if you want to produce a line break within your output, you do it with something called escape characters. In this case, it's \n. Print hello \n plus name plus how are you? And we see in the terminal, hello Nadja with a line break, how are you? Python is very powerful and intuitive when it comes to string manipulation, which makes, for example, indexing and slicing strings very easy. A single character in a string can be accessed with bracket notation and the index of the character you want to access, like print name and then the index 1. Please keep in mind that the first index is 0, not 1, because computers always count from 0 instead of 1. If you want to get a substring of a string, just define the start index, colon, end index to get there. Leave start or end blank to begin or end at the start or the end of the string. Something like the following. Print name and in brackets, colon 3, it's from start to the third index. Print name 3, colon, and nothing is from the third index to the end of the string. Print name from index 2, colon, to index 4. Okay, let's see the results. Strings are immutable in Python, which means that once a string is defined, it can't be changed. There are no mutating methods for strings. This is unlike data type like lists, which can be modified once they are created. That doesn't mean that you can't reassign the variable once created in order to modify the original variable. You could do something like name is Nadja. Print name and we see the name is Nadja. Name is Nadja plus and another string and Christian. And now we see print name and the result in the terminal is the name is now Nadja and Christian. There are a lot of string manipulation methods available in Python, which I will cover in upcoming Python learning courses. So make sure to like and subscribe if you want to know more about that. The next data type that I would like to introduce is called Boolean, and it can have only two states, which is true or false, and will be used to evaluate expressions that are common in other important programming concept, which is called flow control. Usually a computer program runs line by line, top to bottom, so the question is, what can you do to change this behavior if you want to manipulate the control flow? Python offers a lot of standard control flow mechanisms in order to do so. The first one is the if statement that is used to determine the execution of code based on the evaluation of a Boolean expression, like if a is greater than 0, print a is bigger than 0. And we see in the terminal that this line got printed, because a was bigger than 0. That also means that code will not be executed if the evaluation of a Boolean expression is false, like the following. Let's write print before our expression, and if a is smaller than 0, print a is smaller than 0. And after that we will print after our expression. So you see now that we get the two print statements, but not the one depending on our Boolean expression. We can use the else statement to tell our computer program to do something different when the evaluation of the if statement is false. Let's make a simple example, and don't worry, these are just the basics. We will come to the more fun parts in a few minutes. The last statement in the condition-based control area is called elif or else if, that you might know from other programming languages as well. You can use it to check another condition if the first if statement is not true, or the other if statements before elif, because you can combine as many elif statements as you want. Let's do a quick example and check the following. If a equals 0, then we print a equals 0. Elif or else if a equals 1, print a equals 1. Else, print a is not 0 nor 1. Please keep in mind that you can combine as many elif statements as you want, and if you are already familiar with other programming languages, you might have already noticed that this is a switch case equivalent that you can use in Python. Sometimes you want to execute the same code multiple times. In that case, you don't have to write the same statement over and over again. You can use a flow control mechanism called loops. In Python there are two types of loops available, the for and the while loop. The for loop iterates over a given sequence or over a sequence of numbers using the range function. Let's have an example. The assumption is that we have given a sequence with prime numbers like the following. A variable called primes, which contains 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 19, 23 and 29. Now let's do our for loop. For prime in primes, print prime. So as a result, we now get all the prime numbers printed. If you just want to execute the same statement 10 times, you can just add a range function like for x in range 10, print x. Keep in mind that Python and other programming languages start counting from 0 and not from 1. We will have a lot of real-life examples in the second part of the course when we start to program a small computer game with the skills that you have already acquired. But before we do that, let's continue with the while loop statement. Because sometimes you don't know how long you need to execute the same piece of code and you want to repeat as long as a certain Boolean condition is met, like the following. While a is smaller than 10, print a. And then a plus is 1, which is the same statement as a is a plus 1. And please don't be afraid that we use a lot of numbers and logical expressions here. I promise that you don't have to be a mathematical genius to become a professional software developer. The basics are enough, and after a while all of that will feel pretty natural to you. After a while you will also experience that the programming language at all doesn't matter that much, because if you understand how a computer executes code, you can write the same software in every language. But let's continue with our loops, and let's talk about two statements that you can use within your loop to either skip the execution of the current block and return to the for or while statement, or to exit the whole loop and continue with the program execution. At first, let's leave our while loop when we reach a certain condition, like a equals 5. So, let's have a while loop. And the while loop runs while counter is smaller than 10. Okay, in the first line, we will add a 1 to each counter each time we access this block. After that, we check if counter is 5, then we do a break to leave our while loop. Okay, after that, we print out the counter. So, and in the terminal, now we see that we have left the while loop after the counter gets 5. So you learned that you can use a break statement to exit the whole loop. But what if you want to skip just one execution of the loop and continue with the next iteration? In this case, you can use the continue statement like in the following example. So, we again have a while loop. While counter is smaller than 10, we add another 1 to counter, and if counter equals 5, we want to continue, and then we print out counter. So, and what you see now in the terminal is that we have skipped the part where counter equals 5. Unlike other programming languages like C, C# or JavaScript, you can use the else statement with loops in Python. This code will be executed when the condition of the for or the while statement fails. Let's have a quick example. Let's write while, in parentheses a is smaller than 3, print a, and then a plus equals 1. Else, print while loop finished after plus a plus iterations. Please keep in mind that the break statement used to exit the loop will skip the else code block of your loop, but that the code gets executed even if there are continue statements within your loop. You already learned a lot about Python, but I forgot to mention two important aspects. The first one is that Python uses indentation for blocks instead of curly braces. Both tabs and spaces are supported, but the standard indentation requires standard Python code to use 4 spaces. The next important thing is that Python supports comments that won't be interpreted by the Python interpreter, and that are always single line, started with a route. Every character after a route sign is a comment, which means that you can have comments in a line where you have already written code, for example, to explain what a variable is used for. Unlike other programming languages, Python does not support multi-line commands, but if you really need them, you could use docstrings to do so, but it's nothing that I would recommend. Now that you have a basic understanding of the Python programming language, we will start writing our first computer program in Python. And that will be a small game that will teach you other important concepts like functions, classes, modules, and a bunch of useful data types that are common in Python. To do so, we have to clone a Git repository with graphical assets first, because all the characters used in the game needs to be available on your computer. In case that you don't know what Git is, it is a source control management system that is used to collaborate with others and keep track of every version of the code you are writing. It also helps with merging code of different people together, but for now, just keep in mind that Git is the source code management system or SCM, and that we will use it now to download graphical assets needed for the next step of this tutorial. If you are interested in tools and skills you need to know in order to become a professional software developer, make sure to like and subscribe, because I will provide a free course here at YouTube in future. Let's download Git to your computer. Go to the website git-scm.com and download the latest version of Git to your computer. Now you are able to clone the repository containing the graphical assets needed in order to continue with the tutorial. Open your terminal in Visual Studio Code and write the following: git clone https github.com/ILTPWC in uppercase /python-basic-tutorial.git. Git will now download the full course to your computer, including the graphical assets for the game, as well as a short documentation of all the things you learned so far about Python. Let's open the folder My First Game in Visual Studio Code and continue with the tutorial. Make sure to open the game.py file in your editor and press play. You should see our game character, a little robot, and our task for the next minutes is to teach him how to move and run through a 2D environment. Let's have a look on the code that is already there and focus on the next important programming concept that you need to understand in order to learn Python, which are functions. Functions are a convenient way to divide your code into useful blocks, make it more maintainable, and that allows the reuse of your code. These functions are a key way to define interfaces so that programmers can share their code. Usually, a function is a block of reusable code that is used to perform a single related action. And we already use a lot of Python's inbuilt functions like range that are always available. A new function block begins with the keyword def, followed by the function's name and parentheses, which can but don't have to include any input parameters or arguments followed by a colon. Once a function is defined, you can call them by their name, passing all the argument if needed in parentheses. Please keep in mind that all parameters or arguments in Python language are passed by reference. That means if you change what a parameter refers to within a function, the change also reflects back in the calling function. The first function that is created by our game is called draw, and it's simply a function to encapsulate all the steps needed in order to fill the game screen with characters, called actors in Pygame 0, the framework that we are using for the game, and other sprites. That's how 2D art is called in computer games. The function will automatically be called once a frame from the Pygame 0 engine that we start with pgz1.go parentheses. But more about that later. Let's write our first function from scratch and call it update, with one parameter or argument called dt for delta time. So we write def update with dt in parentheses, colon, and with one level indentation, we write the first code to let our robot move to the right when the player presses the D button on the keyboard. To do so, we need to check first if the keyboard button D is pressed, something that we can do with the already introduced if statement. So let's write if keyboard.d, then robot.x minus equal robot underscore speed multiply with delta time or dt. We will also cover the case where the robot needs to move to the left by checking if keyboard.a robot.x plus equals robot underscore speed multiply by dt. We press play. Now our robot is able to move to the left and to the right, but our character, the little robot, is also able to leave the game screen to the left and to the right. But before we fix that, let's introduce another important concept of object-oriented programming languages like Python, which are classes and objects, or instances to use a more general term of those. Objects are an encapsulation of variables and functions into a single entity. These objects are created from templates called classes in programming languages, so also in Python. To define a new class, you use the keyword class followed by the name of the class and a colon. Every variable and function you add in the class's code block will be part of the new class. To instantiate a new object from your class template, you just assign it as a variable followed by the class name and parentheses. Within these parentheses, you could provide arguments in case there is a special constructor needed in order to create such an object. A constructor is a default function that gets called when an object gets instantiated or initialized, and which is used to pass values to the class's variables. Let's have a look on our game source code and read the first line of the game's variables. What you see here is that we created a variable called robot that gets assigned a new object of class actor with two parameters. One defining the name of the character that is also used to find an image matching the name, and another which holds the X and the Y position of our character in the game world. During the update method, we already used the variable x from the object robot defined in the class actor to update the robot's position. Okay, let's write our first class. To do so, we will create a new file called world.py that will hold our world class that describes the environment of our game world. We start our class with the keyword class followed by the name world and a colon. So let's write class world colon. Let's define a variable called gravity and assign it the value 80. And we will also create a constructor that is able to pass a value to the gravity variable. To do so, we have to write def underscore underscore init underscore underscore, and we pass two arguments, self and gravity. And then within this function, we will write self.gravity equals gravity. You might notice that we have used the keyword self, which represents the instance of the class. By using self, we can access the variables and methods of the class in Python. Keep in mind that self must be provided as a first parameter to the instance method and constructor. If you don't provide it, it will cause an error. You as a programmer can use another parameter name for self in a constructor, but I would recommend to use self to increase code readability. Thanks a lot for watching this episode of ILTPWC. Hope you enjoyed and learned something. In the next episode, I will try to code a classic Doom 2 port that works with the original WAD files. And I will have ChatGPT as a co-pilot in this session. So, like and subscribe, it really means a lot for me. And thanks a lot for watching. Bye.